I forgot to buy it. As soon as I pressed Anthony, he laughed joyfully. He definitely did it on purpose, not buying a plane ticket just for me. Oh, Anthony, you're such a klutz. While holding her stomach from laughing too much, the mother-in-law called out to Anthony. Everyone was laughing uproariously, and I genuinely felt sick. That's enough. I'm going home, I said with a sigh.
Yeah.
Go ahead. A fancy inn isn't suitable for someone like you, right? It's actually a good thing, Anthony said, smiling. Don't splurge on eating out just because you're alone. I'll be checking the receipts later, the mother-in-law said condescendingly, chuckling. Well, if that's settled, let's get going. The father-in-law cheerfully called to Anthony and the others. And they headed toward the boarding gate. How much do these people look down on me? I can never forgive them. I took out my smartphone and made a call to someone. Surely, the three of them will regret this storm. I am Jane Walters. I turned 50 this year. Currently, I live with my husband, Anthony. We live a short distance away from my in-laws, about a 15-minute walk from our house. I met Anthony more than 20 years after becoming a working adult. At my current company, I am in charge of sales. Recently, failing to meet my sales targets made going to work depressing. Naturally, my mood was low, and sales did not follow. Being scolded by my boss for poor sales performance made me hate going to work even more. I felt like I was caught in a negative loop. That's when I met Anthony. Our meeting was in the break room of the 10-story building where I worked. This building housed several companies, and there was a shared break room on the 3rd floor. During lunch break, female employees from other floors would eat their packed lunches there. I often rested in this break room when scolded by my boss. And today, after failing to meet my targets again, I was scolded loudly in front of everyone by my boss. As I sat alone on a chair feeling down, Anthony approached me. Are you okay? You seem down. Actually, I confided my work troubles to Anthony, whom I had just met. Since Anthony didn't work at the same company, I could talk to him more freely. Anthony listened sympathetically to my story. After our conversation, Anthony said, "From now on, I'll listen to you. So, let's exchange contact information?" Thank you. Touched by Anthony's kindness, I responded with a smile, feeling like I might cry. By this time, I think I had already fallen for him. After that, Anthony and I grew closer. Gradually, we began dating, and after a while, we started a relationship. Then, a year into our relationship, Anthony proposed, and we decided to get married. Right after we decided to marry, I met his parents. We look forward to having you, no need to overextend yourself regarding our support. The mother-in-law was smiling and seemed kind. Once you marry Anthony, let's all go on a family trip. Saying this, the father-in-law laughed heartily. He seemed like an average person, and I felt relieved. Then we discussed and decided not to have children. I married Anthony in my late 40s. Starting a family then would have been too much for my body. Moreover, Anthony had said, I want to live a life with some financial leeway. I also want to show filial piety to my parents. I wanted to do well in my job, so I readily agreed to Anthony's proposal. And then we bought a new house together. Using both of our savings, we managed to buy a small house outright. I believed we could become even happier. But, it was all an illusion, I soon realized. Since getting married, the in-laws frequently troubled me. For example, their sudden visits. Since Anthony and I started living in our purchased house, the in-laws would come without notice. They would point out in detail how I was lacking as a housewife. At times, they would open the fridge and closets without permission and check the contents. Then, while screaming, they would berate me. What's with this fridge? Why only cheap supermarket beef? Do you intend to feed this to Anthony? The mother-in-law screamed as soon as she opened the fridge today. Even if you say that. Since we had spent our savings on the house, we were trying to save as much as possible. So, I was troubled when the mother-in-law complained like that. I had no choice but to endure the mother-in-law's remarks. One day, as usual, the in-laws came over. The mother-in-law, as if it were natural, brought a large paper bag, planning to take something from our house. At first, the in-laws came empty-handed, but after a few visits, they started bringing large paper bags. And every time, they would take away a large amount of food and daily necessities from our house. The things the in-laws took were all paid for out of my wallet. With such inconsiderate in-laws, I grew increasingly distressed. As I was puzzled by the in-laws' actions, the mother-in-law took a piece of clothing from my closet. What is this dress? It doesn't look expensive. You're wasting money again. Oh. That's... I exclaimed involuntarily. My mother-in-law was holding my dress, waving it about. Seeing that dress, I turned pale. Mother, please don't open it without permission. Moreover, this dress is a birthday gift from my mother. Please, give it back. I desperately tried to get the dress back from her. Actually, this dress was something my mother had always cherished. For her work, she would wear clothes from famous brands when visiting clients. This dress was given to me by my mother with the words, "You're at the age now, Jane, to become a dignified woman like me." Therefore, I couldn't let my mother-in-law have it. However, upon seeing the dress, my mother-in-law smiled wickedly. Such nice clothes are too soon for you. I'll wear them instead. You should be thankful. But, it's a birthday gift from my mother, isn't it? I felt like crying. Watching the whole scene, Anthony, laughing, said, "Mom's offering to wear it for you, you should be grateful. You're a Walter's wife now. It's your duty to listen to what Mom says, right?" Anthony always used the phrase "a Walter's wife" to make me concede. It wasn't something new. The first weekend after we got married, when I was called to the in-laws' house early in the morning to weed the garden, Anthony said the same thing. It's a tradition for Walter's wife. Understand? Get to it then. Anthony acted as if his status made him superior. However, I didn't want to give up the dress. While I remained silent in frustration, my father-in-law dismissively said, "Anthony married an older bride, and we can't even see a grandchild. The least you can do is show us filial piety, right?" Though he called me older, Anthony and I are the same age. I was irritated by my father-in-law's attitude that men are fine but women are not. Exactly, Dad's right. Just give the dress to Mom. Anthony nodded as if it was obvious. This is terrible. I didn't have a single ally in this house. Whatever I said, I was made out to be the villain. My mother-in-law happily put the dress in a paper bag. Reluctantly, I succumbed to Anthony and my in-laws' demands. And the problem isn't just the in-laws. Anthony also has a significant issue. Recently, he's been coming home late, and we haven't had dinner together for days. I'm home. Today, too, Anthony returned at 1 a.m. in high spirits, likely from drinking. His face was flushed red. "Welcome back." I greeted Anthony with a puzzled look. Without paying any attention to me, he spoke. "I'm going to take a shower. Put my bag away for me." After thrusting his bag at me, Anthony went straight to the bathroom. It's always like this. I sighed as I went to place his bag in his room. Then, I heard a notification sound from a smartphone in the bag. Anthony left his smartphone in the bag again. Anthony usually carried his smartphone with him at all times. But it seemed he had forgotten it today, probably because he was drunk. It could be a serious work-related call. I gently took out Anthony's smartphone from the bag. As I looked at the screen, I froze. What is this? Displayed on the smartphone was the name Claire. I had fun with Anthony today. But it got late. Isn't your wife suspicious? Claire is worried. Seeing this message, I was convinced of Anthony's infidelity. More messages from Claire followed, some quite explicit, revealing that Anthony had been cheating for a long time. I emotionlessly took photos of the screen one after another. This was evidence of Anthony's infidelity, useful if needed. However, this alone was not sufficient proof. I sighed. At 50, divorce would make remarriage difficult. Without children, being alone at this point would be mentally tough. What should I do now? I stood there, holding Anthony's smartphone, at a loss for what to do. One day, Anthony said, "Mom and Dad's wedding anniversary is coming up again soon. Get started on planning the trip." Anthony looked at me as if it was only natural for me to take action. Understood. I could only nod in response to Anthony. Every year, we gift a trip for my in-laws' anniversary. Naturally, Anthony and I also accompany them to entertain them. We usually book the same in every year, and I plan to reserve it again this year. But in the next moment, Anthony suggested something unexpected. Right. It's their 50th anniversary this year. Book a special inn, okay? I was bewildered. The usual inn was already quite high grade. Additionally, the travel expenses were all paid from my salary. Paying for the trip is the role of a wife. It's my role to show my parents a good time there. That's why booking an expensive inn would be too much of a burden for me. As I was confused, Anthony spoke irritably. It's their 50th wedding anniversary, isn't it? Don't you have any respect for my parents? Anthony continued to drone on about how I lacked the awareness of being a proper wife. Exhausted by Anthony's preaching, I simply said, "Understood," and ended the conversation. When thinking of a higher grade inn, only one came to mind. And the reservation process for it was a bit special. After successfully making the reservation, I spoke to Anthony. "I've made the reservation for the inn." Anthony grinned and retorted, "I hope it's an inn that meets my standards? I won't accept anything shabby." Trying to find fault with a spiteful face, Anthony. I sighed and replied, "It's a distance away by plane, but it's a solid inn. Look, this should satisfy you, right?" Saying this, I showed Anthony the inn's website on my smartphone, and he nodded in satisfaction. "Well, this is passable. Have you made the flight reservation yet?" "Not yet. It shouldn't be crowded around this time, and it's a weekday. I think booking the flight won't be a problem." As I answered, Anthony unexpectedly said something. "I'll take care of booking the flight." This sudden offer from Anthony, who had previously been completely inactive, surprised me, but I asked, "Really? Are you sure?" Anthony smiled warmly. "Yeah. You always work hard, Jane. I can at least book the flight." "Thank you for everything." "Thank you, too." I sincerely thanked Anthony. I thought Anthony was finally being cooperative. Maybe Anthony was starting to change. I was hopeful. However, my judgment at this time would greatly shake things up. On the day of the trip, Anthony went to pick up his parents first, so I was to meet them at the airport. Sorry for the wait. I appeared, carrying both my and Anthony's luggage, and they were already at the meeting point. And for some reason, Anthony and his parents were grinning. I had a bad feeling. While thinking this, I noticed the plane tickets in the hands of Anthony and his parents. I approached Anthony. Can I have my plane ticket, too? Then, in the next moment, Anthony said something unbelievable. I forgot to buy it. Anthony was laughing joyfully. Just mine. I couldn't believe it and asked Anthony.
Yeah.
I bought tickets for Mom and Dad. He just grinned. From his attitude, I realized. He definitely did it on purpose, not buying a plane ticket just for me. Oh, Anthony, you're such a klutz. The mother-in-law, holding her stomach from laughing too much, called out to Anthony. Everyone was laughing uproariously, and I genuinely felt sick. That's enough. I'm going home, I said with a sigh.
Yeah.
Go ahead. A fancy inn isn't suitable for someone like you, right? It's actually a good thing. Anthony was smiling. Don't splurge on eating out just because you're alone. I'll be checking the receipts later. The mother-in-law said condescendingly, chuckling. Well, if that's settled, let's get going. The father-in-law cheerfully called to Anthony and the others. And they headed toward the boarding gate. How much do these people look down on me? I can never forgive them. I took out my smartphone and made a call to someone. Then I immediately purchased a ticket for a different flight. Surely, the three of them will regret this storm. At 3 p.m. that evening, a call came to me. It was silent mode, so it didn't ring, but it was Anthony. I thought as much. I smirked and ignored the call. Actually, the flight tickets Anthony and his parents had were for a morning flight. Check-in was at 3 p.m., so they would probably enjoy some sightseeing after arriving. Unlike Anthony and his parents, I headed to the high-grade inn in advance. And there, I spoke to a certain person waiting at the luxury inn. Mom. Sorry for the sudden visit. That person was my mother. I apologized to her as soon as I met her. What on earth are you doing, Jane? After reserving such a high-grade inn, you suddenly can't stay? My mother asked with a bewildered face. Actually, I told my mother about everything Anthony and his parents had done. And I also told her that even the dress she gave me had been taken by my mother-in-law. Then, my mother, clearly angered, said something. I can't forgive them. I will get that dress back. From there, my mother and I began to formulate a plan. We earnestly asked the landlady for her cooperation. Once the details of the plan were somewhat solidified, Anthony and his parents arrived at the inn. I spotted Anthony and discreetly hid behind the front desk. Unaware of me, Anthony approached the check-in with a smile, his cheerful parents behind him. We have a reservation under the name Walters for 3 p.m. I don't see your wife here. The landlady responded with a puzzled look. The reservation was made under my full name. It was normal for the landlady to ask this. Anthony seemed to understand this, as he did not show any suspicion and confidently explained. My wife couldn't make it due to sudden illness. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Someone else will join later, so there's no need to cancel any spots. I knew who he was referring to but stayed silent and listened. The landlady smiled sweetly and dropped a bombshell. If the wife is not present, you can't use the reservation. What? Anthony and his parents froze at the landlady's sudden declaration. Then, Anthony began calling me multiple times. He must be panicking. Quickly recovering, the mother-in-law pressed the landlady. What do you mean it can't be used? Jane made the reservation herself, and we've come all this way on a plane. The mother-in-law clearly looked perplexed. We're also here to celebrate today. So please, let us use the reservation. Anthony tried to persuade the landlady. The landlady sighed as if resigned. If you insist on using it, you may, but you will have to pay an additional fee. What? What do you mean by an additional fee? Anthony asked, surprised. The landlady glanced at a woman sitting nearby. President, perhaps it's time to tell them the truth. Yes, I think I should step in. Thank you. As the landlady and the woman interacted, the mother-in-law wore a puzzled expression. Who is that woman? Why is she wearing dark sunglasses? As she began to speak, the mother-in-law choked on her words. Because she recognized the woman. That's Jane's mother, isn't it? Why is she here? The mother-in-law said this, bewildered. My mother and the in-laws had only met once at a family-only wedding. My mother smiled sweetly and replied. Long time no see. By the way, where is Jane? She couldn't make it due to ill health. Anthony tried to persist with his lie. My mother sighed at him. Don't lie. I spoke to Jane on the phone just before, and she sounded fine. Besides, this reservation was made using a corporate rate from our company. If she's not here, you'll need to pay the regular price. My mother's use of the term, our company, began to visibly unsettle Anthony and his parents. What? That would be a 70% increase. Can you afford that, Anthony? My mother smirked. What do you mean, our company? Jane never mentioned any corporate rates. And she didn't tell us anything about her mother being involved. Anthony spoke, clearly confused. He was probably overwhelmed by the influx of information. The mother-in-law also addressed my mother. You mean a corporate rate from your company? Even low-level employees get benefits? It must be a small company but with generous benefits. The sharp words from the mother-in-law made my mother frown. I hadn't told Anthony or his parents much about my mother. They hadn't asked in detail, so I hadn't shared much. Thus, my mother's next words came as a big shock to them. Me? I am the president of Smith Group. Jane is actually in line to be the next president. My mother said this with a smile. Smith Group, as in the major company? The mother-in-law exclaimed loudly. Anthony and his father were visibly shocked. Smith Group is one of the leading travel companies in the country. They operate inns and restaurants among other businesses. In fact, this inn is under our group, which allows us to use it at a reduced rate. The Smith Group is a family-run business, with our family managing it for generations. And currently, the president of Smith Group is my mother. I know where Jane works, but it's not with Smith Group. Are you trying to deceive us by lying? Anthony glared at my mother. Anthony and I work in different companies within the same building. That's why he said this to my mother. My mother laughed heartily and explained in amusement. That company is just where she's on assignment. So, her actual employer is Smith Group. She has trained enough and will return to the headquarters the year after next. Saying this, my mother casually handed her business card to Anthony. Anthony looked at the card and his face paled. You really are the president of Smith Group. Anthony trembled slightly. At their side, Anthony's parents had gone pale. The father-in-law, now living on a pension and unemployed, had worked as a company employee before retiring. It seems he worked at a mid-sized company and retired as a department manager. According to what I heard from Anthony, the difference in status between my father-in-law, who retired as a mid-level manager, and my mother, who runs a major corporation, was stark. And then my mother continued her attack. That dress. I gave it to Jane. Why are you wearing it? It's my special dress for important occasions. She glared sharply at the mother-in-law. I'm so sorry. I'll take it off right away. The pale-faced mother-in-law hurriedly looked for a place to change. She quickly changed and returned the dress to my mother. If there's even a slight fray, I'll be billing you for the repairs, understand? Yes. The mother-in-law replied meekly to my mother's declaration. Then Anthony, as if remembering something, muttered quietly, I need to tell Claire not to come here. My mother did not react as if she hadn't heard. However, I did not miss that mutter. I stepped out from behind the front desk and shouted loudly. Claire won't be coming. Jane? Why are you here? I called you several times just now. Anthony was clearly shaken. The mother-in-law was equally disturbed, nearly screaming. Jane. You weren't supposed to have a plane ticket, and they even took your dress. My mother quickly interjected, the dress was originally Jane's. It's not yours. The father-in-law was also visibly upset. Smith Group is much bigger than the company I worked for. And to think she's the president. He said, looking dejected. Being a proud man, this was likely a blow to his ego. I came on a different flight. I came here to get revenge on you all. I smiled slyly. So, Claire not coming is. I made sure she wouldn't come. Right after you all left on the plane this morning, I called her. That day I discovered Anthony's affair through his smartphone. I secretly went to a detective agency and requested an investigation. I had obtained Claire's contact information along with the investigation results. I had intended to talk to Claire directly someday, but I used this opportunity to call her. As a result of our conversation, Claire had made a decision. I calmly told Anthony the truth. Claire has decided to break up with you. After I contacted her about compensation, she apologized. She said, I was only after your money. I was never serious about an old man like you. Claire was still just 30 years old. The reason she was with Anthony, who was 20 years her senior, was for money. She found the allure in being treated to meals and receiving brand-name gifts from Anthony. Claire had clearly stated. Anthony invited me on a trip with his parents, so I thought it was about time to end things. I'm not interested in marrying him. Anthony was shocked by this revelation. That can't be true. I was even considering divorcing to be with Claire. Anthony. The mother-in-law stood by the stunned Anthony. The father-in-law also showed sympathy towards him. My mother and I looked on with disdain at the three of them. Then I made a final decision to Anthony. I'm also divorcing you, Anthony. From now on, whether it's with Claire or not, you're free to date whoever you want. The moment I mentioned divorce, Anthony resisted. I have no intention of divorcing. There's no point without Claire. I definitely won't sign the divorce papers because there's no conclusive evidence of the affair. The mother-in-law agreed with him. Exactly. We won't accept a divorce. After all. Jane, you're going to be the president of Smith Group, right? You can lead an even more affluent life. The mother-in-law's eyes gleamed unpleasantly, and the father-in-law looked pleased. They were probably hoping to receive substantial financial support from me. However, I won't let things go their way. My mother also glared at them. Then, would you please look at this? I handed Anthony and his parents the detective agency's report. The results were definitively incriminating. The photos contained irrefutable evidence. Perhaps because they couldn't deny the facts, Anthony and his parents' faces turned even paler. How could you go this far? Why? I looked at them and smirked. As a condition for waiving Claire's compensation, she agreed to testify favorably for my divorce with Anthony if it goes to court. I'm looking forward to hearing how Claire will testify, aren't you? As I chuckled, Anthony was ashen-faced. His expression was filled with despair. The in-laws looked as if they had been cast into the abyss. I have no intention of forgiving Anthony and his parents. I'm fully prepared to fight them thoroughly, letting them fall into hell. After that, my divorce from Anthony was finalized. Anthony resisted until the end, but he eventually gave in. I'll apologize as many times as it takes, just please, spare me the divorce. If I had known you were going to be the president of Smith Group, I would never have cheated. He pleaded with me. But I was unrelenting. With the help of a competent lawyer introduced by my mother, I presented irrefutable evidence of Anthony's infidelity. Faced with this evidence, Anthony found himself unable to say anything. If things continue this way, it might go to court. Perhaps I should consider increasing the compensation? Hearing this, Anthony's face turned ghostly pale. I'm sorry. With that, Anthony hurriedly signed the divorce papers. Despite all his initial resistance, in the end, it was all over quickly. Although I didn't demand compensation from Claire, she was fired from her job. It turns out she was employed by a partner of the Smith Group. So my mother spoke to her employer. That's not what we agreed on. Claire was reportedly crying, but I didn't care. She would likely struggle to find a new job. Even after the divorce from Anthony, the troubles continued. Anthony and his parents started lurking outside my office building. It seems the divorce brought Anthony's misconduct to light at his company. Anthony had been involved with several other women besides Claire. Some had associated with him for promotions. However, my mother had connections with the president of Anthony's company and revealed all of his actions. Hearing this, the president was furious, and Anthony received a demotion. This led to a surge of internal accusations against him. Some were even considering filing police reports. Eventually, Anthony felt uncomfortable at his former company and resigned, becoming unemployed. His parents, living on a pension and not working, couldn't support an unemployed Anthony. His mother had always been a housewife, and his father had only reached the position of manager before retirement. Their income wasn't substantial, and their pension income was insufficient. With me gone, they couldn't indulge in their previous luxuries and felt dissatisfied. That's why they teamed up with Anthony to ambush me at my workplace. This is troublesome. I consulted the police, but they couldn't act immediately. However, a decisive incident occurred one day. As I tried to enter my office building, ignoring Anthony and his parents who were lying in wait, Anthony approached and grabbed my arm. Ouch. Let go. But Anthony wouldn't release his grip. You've gotten too comfortable while we've been quietly suffering. We're struggling without money. Marry me again, and you'll support us. Anthony said this while thrusting a marriage document at me. All you need to do is sign. Do it for us, quickly. The mother-in-law also grabbed my arm and tried to make me hold a pen. It's useless to try to escape. The father-in-law was there too, and I was surrounded with no way to escape. Enough is enough. Just as I was struggling, a voice called out, Anthony. Enough is enough. It was my mother, sternly reprimanding them. Mom. Relieved by my mother's timely arrival, tears welled up in my eyes. My mother has always been there to support me. Security. Over here. She called for security. Eek. The in-laws panicked and fled. Anthony's screams echoed as he was left behind. Don't leave me behind. Anthony was then apprehended by security and handed over to the police. There were clear marks where he had grabbed my arm. Because of that, I filed a police report this time. The in-laws had fled, but they would soon be contacted by the police. Anthony and his parents had acted in a way that would ruin their social credibility. Jobless and with no prospects, their future was bleak. Since then, I returned to the headquarters of the Smith Group. Anthony's whereabouts are unknown since he fled to avoid arrest. The police eventually visited the in-laws at their home to inquire about the situation. For my safety, I changed my workplace. I could have continued on assignment at the previous company. But since I was scheduled to return to headquarters the following year anyway, my mother thought it best I return now. Back at Smith Group's headquarters, my days are busily spent. I had been involved in sales, accounting, and planning at my previous posting, which provided a broad range of experience. But the scale at headquarters is something else entirely. Every digit in the figures I now deal with keeps me on constant alert. However, I am not alone. Jane. We're going out to meet with clients. You need to get familiar with their faces quickly. Mother called out to me. Coming. I hurriedly followed my mother. This busyness helps me forget the painful past with Anthony. I am endlessly grateful to my mother, who has always been there to help me during tough times. To repay her, I continue to look forward and move on every day.